Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. The war in Ukraine is in its fourth month. Kiev has not lost and Moscow has not won. So what will it take to end it? Diplomacy, talks. But the headlines talk about more weapons being pumped into Ukraine. Today, US President Joe Biden wrote an op-ed in a newspaper. The title was interesting. What America will and will not do in Ukraine. That's what he wrote about. Well, we'll tell you what he has done, what America has done. It sent more weapons worth $9 billion into Ukraine. Now, I'm not a war strategist, but this does not strike me as the best way to end a war. President Biden also wrote about NATO. The US will continue reinforcing NATO's eastern flank, he said. Whatever his intention, Moscow will see it as provocation. And then Biden talked about not pushing for a regime change in Russia, like it's a concession. Russia has responded with a nuclear drill in the middle of a war. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss where the Ukraine story is going. Politics is often called the art of problem solving, and every country has its own playbook. You can throw money at the problem, you can try diplomacy, or if you're the United States, you can throw weapons at the problem. That's what Joe Biden is doing in Ukraine. He's flooding the country with all kinds of weapons. Guess how much are they worth? More than $9 billion. This includes rockets, anti-tank missiles, radars, guns and ammunition. And on Tuesday, Biden announced more of it. His new package includes a controversial weapon, the HIMARS multiple rocket launch system. It's a mobile rocket unit, and it can fire multiple rounds at the same time. Now, why is this weapon controversial? Because of its range. The HIMARS can hit targets 80 kilometers away. That is much more than anything Ukraine currently uses. Right now, their most potent rocket is this one. The M777 howitzer, it tops at around 25 kilometers. But the HIMARS can travel more than twice that distance, 80 kilometers, which means it can target or hit targets behind Russian lines. You could call it a game changer, like the Stinger missiles in Afghanistan or the F-14 Tomcat in Iraq. These rockets could change the tide in the Donbass, and I'll tell you how. Right now, Ukrainian forces are finding it hard to break out. They're under heavy Russian shelling, and their rockets do not have the range to strike Russian targets. In simple words, the Ukrainians are bogged down. Enter HIMARS. Not only can it hit enemy targets, it can do so away from Russia's range. So it's good news for Ukraine, not so much for Russia. The Kremlin had warned against sending advanced missile systems to Ukraine. They called it senseless and risky dumping of weapons. And it's not just words. Russia is flexing its muscles too. Around 1,000 Russian soldiers are holding a nuclear drill near Moscow. They're practicing with 100 vehicles, including the Yars intercontinental ballistic missile launchers. Clearly, Russia was serious about the warnings. So why did Biden go ahead with the rocket shipment in the first place? He clarified his position in an op-ed for the New York Times. Here's what the US president wrote, and I'm quoting. We have moved quickly to send Ukraine a significant amount of weaponry and ammunition so that it can fight on the battlefield and be in the strongest possible position at the negotiating table. That's why I've decided that we will provide the Ukrainians with more advanced rocket systems. Interesting logic. Biden wants diplomacy to succeed. He wants to end the Ukraine war through talks. So what does he do? Send more lethal rockets to Ukraine. Sounds a bit counterproductive, doesn't it? Well, not in America. Remember when they dropped nuclear bombs to make Japan surrender quickly? Same logic here, except advanced rockets are not nuclear bombs. They may give Ukraine a temporary edge, but Russia has enough weapons to level that advantage, which makes you wonder, what exactly is Biden's end game here? His defense officials were talking about weakening Russia. He was accused of extending the war to give Putin a bloody nose. So on Tuesday, Biden hit back. In the same op-ed, he clarified his position on the war. Listen to what he said. We are not encouraging or enabling Ukraine to strike beyond its borders. We do not want to prolong the war just to inflict pain on Russia. This is what the US president has written. And there's another interesting bit. As much as I disagree with Mr. Putin and find his actions an outrage, the United States will not try to bring about his ouster in Moscow. So two clarifications by Biden. A, he does not want to extend the war, and B, he is not seeking to remove Putin from power. These are important clarifications, but the question is, will Putin buy it? Chances are he won't, which is why these rockets are a risky roll of the dice. Biden is hoping the battlefield edge will force Russia to sue for peace, or at least begin talks. But knowing Putin, he will see this as an escalation because it's not just the US, other Western countries too are sending more weapons. Germany is the latest. They have announced air defense systems for Ukraine, which is very good progress from the helmets. And according to Chancellor Olaf Scholz, this is just the start. He wants a complete overhaul of the German defense system. His ultimate goal? To make Germany the most powerful European army in NATO.
What we have achieved is a quantum leap, and it has consequences. The German army will become the biggest conventional European army in NATO, and we will work to continue improving our security architecture, for example, also when it comes to cybersecurity.
So you have big announcements from all over the West. Germany is militarizing. America is sending advanced rocket systems, but none of this was a surprise. In fact, Ukraine had been asking for those weapons since March. Until now, Biden was opposed to it. He thought the rockets would be an escalation. And for once, he was right. The rockets are an escalation. Yes, they will give Ukraine a temporary edge, but at what cost? What if Russia responds with more firepower? Like I said at the start, politics is all about problem solving. But Biden is trying to find a political solution with weapons. It's a risky move. But then again, Biden has nothing to lose. Escalation or not, his country remains safe. Only Ukraine faces the bullets. And Europe faces the heat. They feel the threat of a Russian advance, the Europeans. So European countries are arming themselves. They're also closing ranks. First, Finland and Sweden applied to join the NATO. Now, Denmark is getting off the sidelines. It is already a member of the NATO, but now Denmark plans to join Europe's security framework. A referendum is happening today. And this is a very important story of a very important shift. Danish citizens are deciding their country's military future. They have a simple question to answer. Should Denmark have deeper security ties with Europe or not? Many see this referendum as just a formality. Opinion polls suggest the majority will vote yes. So what is this referendum all about? Let me explain. For 30 years, Denmark has had a unique position in the bloc, in the European Union. Denmark refused to work with Europe on defense. Now, the EU has 27 members. Barring Denmark, all the others, all 26, accept the EU's policy on defense. Denmark has been the odd one out. Danish troops do not go on joint EU military missions. Denmark does not participate in the EU's discussions on defense. But now it wants to change all of that. That's why this referendum. Most political parties in Denmark are on board. 11 out of 14 parties in Denmark's parliament are campaigning for a yes vote. They want to join the European framework. So the outcome is more or less certain. And Russia is not happy about this. Today, Moscow stopped supplying gas to one of the Danish companies. And so far, this has not affected supplies in Denmark. No disruptions were reported today. But Russia's intentions are clear. So seems Denmark's resolve. A yes vote is being called a foregone conclusion. What will it mean for Denmark? How will it change their defence policy? Once it joins the European framework, Danish forces will be able to participate in joint EU military operations. Denmark will be able to develop and acquire more military capabilities with the EU. It will also be able to influence Europe's defence policy at large. The Danish defence forces are among the oldest armed forces in the world. They were created way back in the 16th century in the year 1510. Danish soldiers have fought in many historic battles, like the 30 Years' War within the Roman Empire and the Napoleonic Wars from 1803 to 1815. Now the Danish military is being equipped to take on Russia if needed. Copenhagen is executing a major policy shift. In the month of March, a new budget was passed by the Danish parliament. $1 billion have been set aside. This money will be spent on the military in the next 2 years. Over the next decade, Denmark will spend 2% of its GDP on military. There's another proposal that they're mulling over, allowing American troops on Danish soil. The talks began in February. If Denmark agrees, US soldiers and weapons could land up there. What will they do? What will the American troops do in Denmark? They will train and conduct exercises with their Danish counterparts. And this is, like I said, a very important development because this is a dramatic shift by Denmark. It has not allowed any foreign soldier to set foot in the country since the 1950s. That's because it did not want to upset the Soviet Union. Today, it looks more than willing to stand up to Russia. The war in Ukraine has changed all calculations. Denmark's immediate neighbors, Sweden and Finland, are worried about a Russian invasion too. And that would pose a direct security challenge to the Danes. So they're beefing up their defenses and turning to Europe.
On European security as a whole, I think the decision by Sweden and Finland to apply for NATO membership to a certain extent is an expression of the same logic for why the Danish government decided to put the defense opt-out to the vote. For small European states, being wholly integrated in the European security architecture, whether it be the EU or NATO, is increasingly important at the moment, and especially, of course, around the flashpoints of conflict with Russia, be it the Black Sea, be it the Baltic, or the Arctic Sea for that moment.
The Black Sea, the Arctic Sea, the Baltics, they used to be peaceful. Now they're being called flashpoints. Russia's invasion of Ukraine exposed the many vulnerabilities of Europe. It is now taking steps to protect itself. Its biggest challenge will also be its oldest, building consensus. Let's now talk about the biggest headline from India. The country is mourning the death of one of its most prominent singers, Krishnakumar Kunnath, better known as KK. The singer died hours after performing to a packed audience in the city of Kolkata. While the police is yet to ascertain the cause of his death, the tragedy has raised many questions. Among them is the safety of public places. Our next report tells you more. Hours before KK was declared dead, he was singing to an audience in Kolkata. It was a packed hall. Reports say the capacity was exceeded by a few thousand. There wasn't proper ventilation. The AC was not functioning well. At one point, the singer could be seen taking a pause, wiping off sweat from his face. KK was also seen pointing at the AC. Was he feeling unwell? Some reports say the singer began feeling worse on his way back to the hotel. And after reaching his room, he collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, where he was declared brought dead. What happened to the singer? Only a post-mortem report will be able to tell. Krishnakumar Kunnath was among India's favourite singers. The news of his sudden death broke millions of hearts. Fans who attended KK's final concert have horror stories to share. They say the singer was asking the management to switch on the AC, that people were breaking into the closed auditorium without passes, that at one point some kind of foam had to be sprayed to keep the crowd away. All of this was happening on a peak summer evening. Another instance of negligence and mismanagement of public places in India. While the cause of the death is yet to be established, there's no denying that India has been home to tragedies involving criminal mismanagement or the lack of maintenance in public spaces. One of the most prominent cases dates back to 1997. A theatre in Delhi caught fire, 59 people died. It was later found that even after the fire broke out, the theatre neither paused the movie screening nor did it make an evacuation announcement. A few years ago, tragedy struck an amusement park in Gujarat. A ride snapped midway. 2 people died, dozens were injured. How do fun rides end in tragedy? Sleeping guests end up being killed in hotel fires. How do public spaces turn into death chambers? Was KK's death too caused by negligence? If yes, can India ensure this is the last such tragedy? That public safety becomes non-negotiable, that rules are not broken, and people's lives are not taken for granted. For now, the police have registered a case of unnatural death, and an investigation is on to determine the cause of it. Our next story is from Pakistan. For the last 3 days, the country's Prime Minister has been camping in Turkey, or should I say Turkey. That's what they call themselves now, the Republic of Turkey. Why the name change? To be nationalistic and politically correct. It's another matter that Turkey's friends remain politically corrupt, like Pakistan and its Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif. He faces a money laundering case back home, accusations of embezzling 16 billion Pakistani rupees. Now he wants more, not for himself, but for his country, he says. Now, we've been telling you why. Why does Pakistan need all this money? Because it is in dire straits, its reserves are shrinking, its debts are mounting, it needs money. It has asked China, it has asked America, it has asked the Saudis and the Emiratis, and of course the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Now it is asking Turkey too to help. So Shehbaz Sharif went to Ankara to make the request personally, and guess who he took along? The entire Pakistani cabinet, yet again. The information minister, the defense minister, the foreign minister, even the investment minister, and yes, the Pakistanis do have one, a minister for investments. That's what they survive on, foreign money. But they haven't made progress in Turkey. You see, Turkey is not really in a position to help. It's facing an economic crisis of its own. It has no money to offer. So Pakistan had to settle for MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding, MOU. What are these deals about, MOUs? Boosting bilateral trade. Mr. Sharif plans to take it to $5 billion in 2 years. How exactly? By providing more visas to Turkish businessmen so that they could invest in Pakistan and increase trade. That's exactly what he said in a tweet. Did he discuss anything besides money? Well, yes, he did. Reports say he talked about Kashmir with the Turkish president. Would have been news had he not. This is what he said. Pakistan and Turkey support each other on all issues of core national interest, whether it's Jammu and Kashmir or Northern Cyprus. I thank the Republic of Turkey and its leadership for their principled support on the issue of Kashmir. So nothing new there. A Pakistani Prime Minister meets the Turkish president. How could he not raise Kashmir? What is new or noteworthy, given the setting, was what came next. Shehbaz Sharif talked about trade with India. The new Wazir-e-Azam desires to boost bilateral trade with India. This is what he told a Turkish news agency. Listen carefully. Pakistan and India have a lot to gain from mutually beneficial trade. We are cognizant of the economic dividends that can be accrued from a healthy trade activity with India. Healthy trade activity. How about healthy border activities first? Or perhaps a healthy end to terror? Think about it. Pakistan has no intentions to end its Kashmir campaign. It continues to sponsor terror groups that target India, but it wants to do business with India and get economic dividends through healthy trade. Now look at some recent developments. Last month, Pakistan named a trade minister for its New Delhi mission. When asked the intention, if it was to strengthen trade ties, the country's Commerce Ministry said not at all. They called the appointment a routine posting. A diplomatic formality, they said. And they said it does not mean that they want to change their trade policy with India. This was on the 12th of May. We reported it. 2 weeks on, the country's Prime Minister says Indo-Pak trade will be mutually beneficial. For Pakistan, yes, it will be. For India, not so much. India's doing fine anyway. India has enough trading partners, but Pakistan is desperate. And it's not like the two countries do not trade at all. They do. Between 2020 and 2021, the total bilateral trade between India and Pakistan was said to have been $329 million. Between 2021 and 22, the figure went up to $514 million. This is according to data from India's Ministry of Commerce. 2 years back, the World Bank released an assessment. It said bilateral trade between India and Pakistan has the potential to reach $37 billion. Only both neighbors agree to mend ties. That's an impressive figure, 37 billion. But the thing is that it's hard to do business with Pakistan. They say one thing and do another. Plus, they take more than they give. Indian exports outweigh imports from Pakistan by a huge margin, which explains why Pakistan is desperate to enhance trade ties, not just with India, but also with Russia. Look at this headline now. Pakistan open to purchasing Russian oil if no sanctions levied. This is what the country's finance minister said recently. He said Islamabad would surely consider buying Russian oil if the United States does not sanction it for doing so. They're also importing wheat from Russia, 2 million metric tons of Russian wheat. The deal was struck on Saturday. The order will be dispatched this week. Not very long ago, the same Pakistan was trying to downplay its engagement with Russia. Imran Khan's visit to Moscow was being disowned. The army wanted to tilt the country back towards Washington. But given Pakistan's economic crisis, it cannot be a chooser. It wants trade with India, it wants oil and wheat from Russia, and loans from any country willing to shell out. We almost sympathize with Shehbaz Sharif. And there's a reason why Pakistan wants more trade with India, why Pakistan is looking to buy Russian oil. Because the global economic outlook is quite dull. You cannot pick and choose your partners anymore, it seems. You must reach out to everyone. And two challenges top everyone's priority list: oil and supply chains. Let's start with oil. For the last 2 days, oil prices have been rising steadily. Today, Brent crude was up 1.5%. That's more than $117 billion per barrel. $117 per barrel. What explains this surge? Two things. Number one, the European Union's partial ban on Russian oil. By the end of 2020, they will cut 90% of Russian imports. And that decision has sent prices spiraling. Reason number two, the brutal lockdown in Shanghai is coming to an end. As the city reopens, so will the factories, which means China's oil demand is slated to increase. And these two factors are driving up oil prices. For you and me, that means inflation. Unless oil prices come down, inflation will remain high. So what's the fix? Oil-producing countries must increase output. If they produce more oil, prices will come down. But Gulf states have been reluctant to do that. And the reason is quite simple. Higher prices mean more profits for them. So the likes of Saudi Arabia and the UAE have refused to increase output. But now they are rethinking. They're having a rethink. Take a look at this report by the Wall Street Journal. It says OPEC is considering dropping Russia from the supply quota. What does that mean? It means that OPEC could strike a supply deal without Russia. Basically, go it alone. And if that happens, the Gulf states will be free to increase their oil output without Russia to stabilize the oil markets. But why now? Because Russia is proving to be a liability. Their oil output is expected to fall 8% this year, but OPEC's plan is to gradually increase production. In other words, the two sides are moving in opposite directions now. The solution is to strike a deal without Russia. In fact, this has been done before. Iraq was excluded in the 1990s because of sanctions. So were Libya, Venezuela, and Iran. OPEC's next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, and by then we will have a better idea about oil's future. And like I said, oil is just one challenge. The other is supply chains. Here too, the culprits are the same. Russia's war in Ukraine and China's zero-COVID lockdown in Shanghai. Both factors have strained global supply chains. Some companies are looking for newer options like Apple. Since the last decade, China has been their major production center. iPhones, iPads, most Apple products were made in China. But now it is slowly changing. Apple is planning to shift some iPad production to Vietnam. China was too volatile for them, so they're moving out. And it's not just gadgets. Supply chain issues are affecting food exports as well. Take Malaysia, for example. Normally, they export 3.6 million whole chickens every month. Malaysian chickens travel all over Southeast Asia. But starting this month, there is an export ban because the market is unstable. To grow chickens, you need chicken feed. And what is chicken feed made of? Grain and soybean. Both commodities are in short supply due to the war in Ukraine, so Malaysia has stopped exporting chickens. For neighboring Singapore, this is a national crisis because they cannot survive without chicken. In fact, chicken and rice is the undeclared national dish of Singapore. Just ask this resident.
Chicken rice stores, if not 100% of chicken rice stores, all use fresh chicken rice, basically imported live, slaughtered. So the ban would mean we are no longer able to sell. It's like McDonald's with no burgers, or maybe Coca-Cola without Coke.
Coca-Cola without Coke, he says. Clearly, chicken is more than just food in Singapore. Such supply chain issues are being reported all over the world, in fact. In the US, there is baby formula shortage. And to fix that, Joe Biden is organizing a roundtable today. Top infant formula manufacturers are expected to attend this meeting. Now, most experts agree that this crisis is temporary. Once the lockdowns end, once Russia's war is over, the supply chain should return to normal. But even then, we must focus on building new ones, new and more resilient supply chains, because the current ones are too volatile. If you think about it, two men have single-handedly upset our budgets. Xi Jinping with his illogical lockdowns and Vladimir Putin with his war on Ukraine. Certainly not the hallmark of a reliable system. India, in fact, is already working on alternatives. It is reducing its dependence on Chinese imports. It is delinking itself from supply chains dominated by China. In fact, China is no longer India's top trading partner. It has been replaced by the United States. China slipped to the second spot in the last financial year. And China finds it very hard to accept this. So it's trying to come back on top by rejigging the numbers. Here's a report.
China is losing its grip on the Indian market. New Delhi has a new top trading partner now: the United States of America. Data from the last financial year is out. Bilateral trade between India and the US stood at close to $120 billion. What about China? It has slipped to the second spot. In 2020 to 21, the trade figure for China stood at around $115 billion. The numbers speak for themselves. India's bilateral trade with America is growing. India is cutting back its dependence on China. And Beijing doesn't like that one bit. It is challenging New Delhi's trade numbers. The Chinese Foreign Ministry came up with its own calculations. Beijing claims its trade volume with India stood at around 125 billion and not 115 billion. China has more complaints with India. Recently, Chinese tech companies like Xiaomi, Vivo and ZTE have faced scrutiny. They are being probed for financial misconduct in India. Beijing is miffed by the crackdown.
We firmly support Chinese companies to defend their legitimate rights and interests. The Indian side should act in accordance with the law and provide a fair, just and non-discriminatory business environment for Chinese enterprises to invest and operate in India.
China is known for strong statements and clever accounting, but it cannot contest the obvious trend. India is moving away from Chinese goods. This year, New Delhi secured 2 trade pacts with Australia and the UAE. More deals are in the pipeline. India has begun negotiations with the European Union, the United Kingdom and the Gulf Cooperation Council. With the United States, New Delhi is exploring other ways to expand trade. The focus is on improving market access and investments. The shift away from China has clear economic benefits for India. Going by one estimate, India can add $20 billion to its GDP by reducing its dependence on Chinese imports by half. How can New Delhi accomplish this? It can offer production-linked incentives to manufacturers who make in India. More opportunities can open up if India can integrate more into global supply chains. New Delhi is considering one such proposal, the America-led Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi had joined its launch in Tokyo last month. The Indo-Pacific region represents an opportunity for India. It accounts for more than 60% of the world's GDP and 50% of the global merchandise trade. If India can become a supplier to the Indo-Pacific, it can further shrink the market for Chinese goods, both at home and abroad.
So much is happening in the world, a pandemic, a war, new prime ministers, but guess what the biggest story of the day is? This one. K-pop super band BTS was in the White House. I'm sure you've been flooded by the pictures. There were TikTok posts, Instagram reels. It's impossible, literally impossible, to miss this bit of news. And fun fact, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also visited the White House on the same day. Pretty sure you had no clue. And that tells you how popular BTS is. They grab more eyeballs than a head of state. But why was the BTS in the White House? They were invited by US President Joe Biden. He wanted to discuss the problem of hate crimes against Asian Americans. Now, this is a big issue in the US. Anti-Asian hate crimes rose 73% in 2020, and in 2021, they rose 339%. Biden has admitted the problem. What he needed was a plan of action, maybe an ambassador to talk about the hate crimes, or in this case, 7 ambassadors. All 7 BTS members turned up at the White House on Tuesday, all smiles and all clad in black. Take a look at their conversation with the US President.
It's an honor to meet you, Mr. President. Welcome to the White House. Come on up here, guys. This is an important month here in America. A lot of our Asian American friends have been subject to real discrimination. Hate only hides. When good people talk about it and say how bad it is, it goes down. So thank you.
We want to say thank you sincerely for your decision, such as signing the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law. So we just want to be a little help, and we truly appreciate the White House and the government's trying to find solutions.
2 things to note here. Number 1, kudos to the White House. Talk about hitting 2 birds with 1 stone. They're talking about anti-Asian hate crimes, at the same time scoring some cool points. And number 2, the rise of K-pop. BTS is leading this Korean movement. Do you remember last year's UN General Assembly? BTS were appointed as South Korea's presidential envoys. They danced through the assembly hall, they sang outside the headquarters, and to be perfectly honest, they brought some fun to dreary old diplomacy. And now they're at the White House discussing policy with the President of the United States. If this isn't soft power hegemony, what is? Just think about it. BTS has the power to influence hate crimes in a country 10,000 kilometers away. They're recognizable, they're untouched by controversy, and they're willing to engage in important conversations. It's a perfect example of how to use soft power. And don't forget their economic worth, because the numbers are staggering. BTS's direct economic value is $3.5 billion. Their indirect impact is around $1.2 billion. They make up 0.3% of South Korea's national GDP, 0.3%. That's 7 singers contributing 0.3% of the GDP. The credit also goes to South Korea's government. They harness the power of K-pop. One example is the annual K-pop World Festival. It is organized by South Korea's Foreign Affairs Ministry. They invite K-pop fans from all over the world. Today it's a big ticket event. But this Korean wave did not happen overnight. It was years of calculated investments and planning. And the result is in front of you. BTS, Gangnam Style, Parasite, Squid Game, so many icons have emerged from K-pop. Can you think of any other non-Western country with this kind of soft power? I bet you can't. And why do I say non-Western? Because soft power projection is easier for the West. Their culture is backed by political, economic, and hard power dominance. Not the case for South Korea. They were ravaged by war. They survived bouts of dictatorships. And they live next to a rogue nuclear state. And that makes the Koreans, this Korean wave, all the more impressive. Also, they rarely make bad headlines. Compare that to Hollywood, probably more powerful than K-pop, but the headlines are awful. drugs, anti-vaxxers, gun fanatics, not exactly soft power material. So far, K-pop has stayed away from that mess. Ambassadors like BTS have used their popularity to send the right messages, to make a difference. And that's why they ended up in the White House yesterday. Now let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Sri Lanka reports its highest inflation on record for the 8th consecutive month in May, with inflation figures hitting above 39%, up from 29.8% in April. Ukraine says there have been suspected 15,000 war crimes since the war began, of which it has identified more than 600 Russian war crime suspects and has started prosecuting around 80 of them. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has included an assistant minister for the Republic in his cabinet, raising the prospect of the Queen no longer being head of state. Turkey's President Erdogan has renewed threats of a military offensive in 2 areas of northern Syria, which he says would target Kurdish fighters whom he branded terrorists. Gold prices slide to a 2-week low on a stronger dollar and U.S. Treasury yields amid renewed global inflation concerns. Mexico has announced a ban on the sale of electronic cigarettes and other vaping devices due to concerns about their health effects. The death toll in flooding and landslides triggered by torrential rain in northeastern Brazil has gone up to 106 as emergency workers continued a desperate search for survivors. Fire officials have warned that a wildfire in California's Napa Valley is threatening surrounding structures. The fire broke out late Tuesday afternoon and quickly grew to 50 acres, burning mostly vegetation in California's wine country. Record 13-time champion Rafael Nadal shrugged off his injury concerns to outlast his great rival Novak Djokovic and reached the semi-finals of the French Open for the 6th consecutive year. Nadal beat defending champion Djokovic to win 6-2, 4-6, 6-2, 7-6 to set up a semi-final clash against third seed Alexander Zverev. Former world number 1 Dustin Johnson will headline the first event of the Saudi Arabia-backed LIV Golf Series in London next week. The 2-time major winner will be joined by major winner Sergio Garcia, Martin Kaymer, Graham McDowell, Louis Ottisen and Charles Schwartzel in the 48-man field with a purse of $25 million.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
Allah.